Welcome to the Fortean Winds podcast, where we talk about UFOs and all the related high strangeness. I go by Bones, and with us, as always, is RamX.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Ram. Hey, so in our New Apostles episode, which was 2 episodes ago, we traced the theological roots of Christian dominionism through the New Apostolic Reformation and its 7 Mountains mandate. So, this is kind of a continuation of our series on who runs the world, basically. So we're going in between, last episodes we talked about the fairies and the jinn. So we kind of move between the paranormal and, global power movements, because it's related and it's important.
And we're Forteans, so this should be a weird show. I mean,
right.
I think we fulfill that by just bouncing around between fairies and, who runs the world.
Right. But in this episode, we're going to talk about what they did and how they did it and how deliberate it was. So from theology to strategy, we can't have this discussion without talking about the billionaire class and just how they use kind of a viral conspiracy engine combined with political power, or maybe their desire for political power.
Yeah, this one's not about what they believe. It's more about what they built. How did it happen? Like, I would consider this sort of a reverse whodunit. Like, we all know it was Professor Plum and Colonel Mustard.
Right.
But were they in the library? Did they have candlesticks? Like, what happened?
Yeah.
In our Exposing the New Apostles episode, we discussed how this group got into power. I was really interested in how the checks and balances have been failing. I really wanted to know how a democracy gets taken over. And I think it's like we could look at it, and I hope to frame it today as more of an academic question. I mean, we all are familiar with the U.S., the Constitution, and these checks and balances, the different branches and how they share power. But how did someone actually plan and get all the way through that? How was it executed? And which parts were covert? Which parts were deceptive? I think we've been able to map how this movement got into power and the tactics that they've used. And I find it fascinating, just on a historical level. We always say we're living through modern history. So this is modern history in action.
It certainly is.
So for decades, this 7 Mountains theology sat at the fringe. It was a dream Christians could reclaim society by controlling 7 pillars: government, media, education, business, arts, family, and religion. And this idea has deep, deep roots. We can take this back hundreds of years if we want. We could take it back thousands of years if we want. But we're actually just going to start from 2010, because that's when a strategic fusion started. That's when we would say something operational that's taking form today began.
Right.
And it was at this point when dominionist revivalism met the Tea Party. You got to remember the traditional GOP coalition was begun during Goldwater. And what he had done was he had put together a coalition of financial elites, libertarian anti-government types, and religious conservatives. So since the beginning, there is something of a conflict between the religious right and the anti-government types in the party. The religious right would like something like a theocracy, and the anti-government types don't want anyone in their business. The anti-government types get more into the Tea Party, which is very pro-libertarian, and then yet somehow the dominionist revivalist ideas start to get mixed in there in 2010. And here we see how these power games often get played. Where, like we discussed in our Who Runs the World episode, what we're dealing with is power nodes. We're dealing with different groups, and they form alliances. And this is just a great example of that, because you have Dominion revivalist types then forming a alliance with the Tea Party types. Well, what do they share in common? They have certain things in common, and what they have in common is a dislike of what they see as draconian or even fascist tactics from the left. So these dominionist groups begin infiltrating the Tea Party, becoming one with the Tea Party, and they start using prophetic language. And whether people who are anti-government types believe in that prophetic language or not, they see it as a path towards some sort of power. So this becomes sort of a contract between even us and the public, right? Where people are finding alliances. And what you may be shocked to know, or maybe not shocked to know, is that that was very deliberate at the top. There were alliances between financials, which we'll get into more today. And during this period in the 2010s, churches became training camps for governance. They started to blend church and state. Pastors were starting to talk about partisan ideas in the pews. And then you have the donors get involved. So we had Robert Mercer and his family. He's a hedge fund manager that's very wealthy and has supported a lot of these things. We had the Wilkes brothers, Tim Dunn from Oil Money. We had Ferris Wilkes, who builds church political hybrids in Texas. And then you have the Shell USA Foundation. I'm sure you've all heard of that, which quietly funds NAR-aligned non-government organizations, or NGOs.
An interesting phrase there, you talk about church political hybrids. There was also a recent move by the federal government to allow churches to talk about politics without any threat to their tax exemptions, which is an important thing.
And none of those things are accidental. So that's what was amazing here, and that's what I think we're trying to unpack, is that this was systematized. It was so deliberate and so planned and so well executed. I have to give credit where credit's due.
Yeah.
Like you don't take over a democracy like the U.S. easily. This was incredibly well executed. And what it required, which is going to become really important, is loyalty. It required such absolute loyalty. And it was like the only, and this is going to become central to what we're going to talk about today, because this is ultimately what the Trump administration got. They got loyalists who would cover up the Epstein files. They got loyalists who would attack countries for oil. They got loyalists who would funnel money into personal and foreign accounts.
Right.
And as we mentioned, Michael Flynn was going around handing out those divine assignments with that ReAwaken America tour.
Yeah.
And there was so much interest in Charlie Kirk's TPUSA faith. So Candace Owens is all over the news. I'm sure people are hearing about the conspiracy theories that she has around Charlie Kirk's death. But if you're not following it at all, I would just say the official narrative of what the ballistics and the forensics say is a highly unlikely scenario. So what they're saying is that he was shot from like 150 yards with a 30-06, and there was no exit wound. There have been people since who've done some public videos on ballistics dummies that show you what happens with a rifle caliber of that size and a human body. So there are good questions about that, but the trial hasn't happened. I'm sure that his defense lawyers are going to bring that up, and then we're going to get more information.
Right, that's true. The trial hasn't even started yet.
But that said, people like Candace Owens are showing texts. She's showing texts that she got from Charlie Kirk that show a very different story than what was being portrayed to the public. Apparently, he was questioning his Israel support. He definitely turned around on Epstein. I know we called him out for that, for waffling on Epstein, but it should be mentioned that he turned around on that, and he was calling for the full release of the Epstein files too. So people are like, oh, those were all motives for him to be shot. Maybe, maybe not. There's a whole chain of evidence that would have to be there in order to support that. You can find someone's motive and then work backwards from that, but it's just a motive until you find evidence.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's a dangerous game when you're playing with religion. You just don't know who you're going to activate.
Yes, and people are getting activated, and there are a bunch of instances of people getting death threats and even committing violence that are getting triggered by all of this. So
right.
We should just be measured and look for evidence and discuss the evidence. And this is what I mean by this sort of being a reverse whodunit, because there was a 900-page manual that was released about Project 2025. It's not like these people hid this. They said very openly, this is what we want to do.
Yeah.
We want to take over the government. So I'm not actually alleging anything illegal here. I'm saying that there was some systemic manipulation that happened here that I think we all just need to be aware of. You can judge it how you will, but it's how democracy got kind of hijacked. So we should understand it, right?
It's kind of a real shame, too, because, when you look at the history of it, post-World War II, after seeing, how fascism could come about so quickly in Europe and how devastating it can be, the country as a whole was a little more aware of this kind of stuff. And I remember reading about how Eisenhower was a religious man, but he was the last of those on the right, the leaders that were still trying to distance themselves from religion or not using religion as a campaign issue because they knew the dangers of it.
Yeah, we've seen people forget about the dangers of World War II and fascism. And we've also seen education take a drop. And we've also seen IQ take a drop. So people are just interpreting history all wrong.
Right.
But the installation was underway, all the way back into the 2010s. But then they don't really all come into power during Trump's first term. There are various people in Trump's cabinet and in his administration, like General Mattis, who then came out later after the first term and said, yeah, I was getting in the way of Trump's worst instincts. I was stopping him from doing this. Well, Trump understood that. And so this group saw an opportunity there. They said, we can install people who will not tell you no, as long as you can give us certain policies that we want.
Right.
And that was the exchange there. It was loyalty for power.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like that movement was basically just waiting for the perfect populist to come into play to use for their movement.
And Steve Bannon saw the opportunity. He gets involved in this academy that's overseas that is training all of these people to come in and take control of the government when Trump comes in his second term. So he saw this coming. He saw what would interest Trump, which was this loyalist army, and he saw bodies. That's what this other part wants, this billionaire financial class wants. They need bodies because who's going to support billionaires getting tax cuts? Nobody.
Yeah.
Who's going to support sacrificing their health care to give billionaires tax cuts? Nobody. So they need bodies for everything they do. Peter Thiel needs bodies to get his AI data centers supported. So he finds a path to power here too. And he's like, I will give you power. In return, you will give me loyalty. That's the exchange.
Right.
And we discussed QAnon, but QAnon, we now would say in this system, how did it happen systematically? QAnon wasn't just a conspiracy, it was a narrative delivery system. It mixed Christian lingo with military lingo and intelligence-type theater, psyop theater. It was decode this, decode that. We've got the secret.
Right.
And then they rebranded spiritual war as digital combat.
The timeline of QAnon, too, seems to correlate with the activity of big money into politics. Right? Because in 2010, we got that Citizens United ruling that basically allowed just unlimited amounts of money to go into campaigns. I mean, it's not officially supposed to be in a campaign, but it is. That's when Obama was elected, and he was elected because of their really strong online campaigning. And the right was very behind. And so suddenly they saw that happening, and they knew they needed something to change so they could pour in all this money to basically take over the online sphere of campaigning. And it's just, the timing is so strange, because I remember back in the day, QAnon came up, and it got more and more popular. And it's like, where the hell is this coming from? And, and pedophilia was a huge topic.
Yes, as a part of the QAnon narrative. And because you needed something so extreme and so terrible to turn people into warriors, right?
Right.
You're saving the children. And this began, so we're saying the timeline began in the 2010s, and these dominionist groups sort of infiltrate the Tea Party, and they get these ideas mixed up. And then by 2017, that's already primed the pump. Now you're given the perfect info sword, if you will, to hit that target. And I should mention that since we've started talking about this, there's some people that reached out to me separately that are very convinced that the QAnon was not random. It was very deliberate, and it grew out of Cicada 3301, which was a name given to an online puzzle that got people involved said that they were looking for people who were highly intelligent. There are some very interesting connections there. But I don't want to get hung up on that. So I go, QAnon was either random or super well planned. Either way, they couldn't have known how popular it was going to be. That required a little bit of luck. So then there was taking advantage of it. There's
Right.
no intelligence or psychological operation is ever going to go the way you plan. There's always going to need to be some improv involved and some taking advantage of opportunities. It was during this period in 2017 where churches reframed it as divine revelation. Influencers started to repackage it as truth-seeking. Social media rewarded it with viral traction. Lots of views, lots of clicks, lots of likes. It took off, right? And behind it all, we had some key themes. Apocalypse, martyrdom, a great awakening.
Ah, yes, the Great Awakening. You can't have a religious movement without the apocalypse, though.
Yeah, everyone's waiting for X Day.
Right. I mean, that's what I have a problem. We've talked at length about the occult, and it's a really fine line when you look at some of the religion that's in our politics, how much of it is an occult, or is it turning into the occult, especially with some of these billionaires. You don't know if they're believing what they're talking about or they're just using it as a tool, like you said.
Yeah, this is a really strong thread that runs throughout conspiracy groups and narratives. Are these 1% groups engaged in some sort of occult activity? And I would just say at this point, I'm open to the idea. I'm looking for it all the time. What we've found at this point are disparate occult groups at this level, within the 1%. We don't seem to have found one common group of doing really similar rituals for really similar entities. One could say maybe Bohemian Grove represents that. It's pretty well established now that Bohemian Grove is a place where the 1% go. They do have a very occult ceremony that they do out there called the cremation of care. I don't care what they call it. That is occult.
Yeah.
So one could say maybe, but we'd be looking for something more solid, and we continue to look for it. Because the money that was put into these groups was very real. And some of these groups are most definitely occult. And these were strategic investments. They invested in things like tax cuts, deregulation, anti-labor policies. Why would a religious movement be against unions?
Right.
And then there was an environmental rollback. They really hated any sort of environmental regulations. Now, all of these things are part of Russian intelligence doctrine. They literally have said, and we have literally captured that data that says they want to screw up our environment in the U.S. They want us to live in a toxic place. That would make them more powerful and us less powerful. So there's a number of these things that, they fit Putin's agenda. And it's not just Putin, it's anyone that hates the U.S.
Yeah.
They fit China's agenda too. Anything that makes us weaker makes them stronger. So what happened? They started pushing behind all of this stuff. I went and I looked in the archives at the ads that they ran during this time period, during 2016, and when they did the post investigation, they said Russia was messing with our election. Well, they were, but they've been messing with our election all the way back to 2012, probably before. And they also weren't just messing with the election. They were taking part in the culture wars. They were manufacturing the culture wars. So they were pretending to be someone pro-BLM and someone anti-BLM in the same thread. And they were just trying to get people involved. So, and we're going to get into this today because I have some numbers that I did a full analysis on Twitter because that gets involved here. I'll just give you the highlight now. Based on my analysis, and this is conservative, 35% of accounts on Twitter are bot accounts.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it.
Over half of the traffic engagement is bot traffic. So when you're seeing someone with 1.2 million followers, they probably have more like 600,000 followers. When they have 15,000 engagement on a post, it's probably more like 7,500. And then a big chunk of that is going to be from a different country that is just trying to push whatever narrative they see as being divisive. So it could be pro-left, it could be pro-right. But if it's divisive, it's controversial, they just want to see us fighting.
Yep.
So they end up pushing behind the QAnon narrative because they see it as being disruptive and they see it as potentially weakening the U.S. So now you've got a certain class of billionaires mixed up with a certain class of Christian dominionists mixed up with a certain number of foreign actors with bad intentions. This is the type of thing we see at this who runs the world level.
Yeah.
And let me just hit you with some fast facts from our analysis. Like 70% of Trump's cabinet picks are now linked to Project 2025. Elon Musk was funding those groups a year before the 2024 race, so all the way back in 2023.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that tells you that there's lines of communication between these billionaire oligarchs and this movement.
And how Christian is Elon Musk?
Yeah, right.
Why is he backing Project 2025?
Right. Wants to bring Jesus to Mars.
During this time, you had churches hosting ReAwaken rallies, which were linked to the Apostolic Prophet Network. So they were getting more and more mixed up too, as well as the money. And then the Turning Point Academy was training youth in Seven Mountains politics. They were creating this next generation of bureaucrats that would follow their rule. And then began the loyalty databases. Like, you're all seeing this stuff about federal workers being fired, loyalty is on the line, court cases, etc. But this loyalty thing is very real because they don't want anyone choosing to follow the Constitution over what they say. They're already trying this game with the military, and that, I got to tell you, that's not going to go very far.
Yeah.
Like, do you really think when someone puts on a military uniform, they stop being American?
Right.
Do you think those guys who shave their heads and get up at 5 a.m. to run every day forgot that they swore an oath to the Constitution?
Right.
So as we talk about this, I don't think it will all work. The question is, how did they get this far? Like, this is fascinating in its way, right?
And we see the obvious, Russian influence, and we know why they want to influence our politics. But all you have to do is look at how their invasion of Ukraine has gone to see how bad this type of governance is. I mean, their military was just completely riddled with corruption and dysfunction from just decades of this like loyalty-based system.
Please rewind the tape so that everyone can see what happens in an oligarchy when you have money dedicated to the military that doesn't actually get to the military. All those tanks and trucks were breaking down. People thought that the Ukraine war was going to take weeks.
Yeah.
But as soon as those machines got out there and started breaking down, everyone started realizing that the money was going elsewhere.
Right. You just had a bunch of corrupt, drunk officers, basically, that were loyal to the Putin's cause and nothing else.
And while we're discussing that, I have to bring up UAP. People keep pointing to some Russian vessels and saying that those are what's launching these mystery drones. Well, why aren't we seeing mystery drones on the field in the Ukraine? Since that war has not been going the way they wanted, why haven't we seen any of that?
I know. The default is always to say, oh, it's Russia, or they have some kind of secret tech, but they are desperate for some secret tech in Ukraine because they're getting their butts kicked.
Yeah, Russia's GDP is smaller than California's. So people are looking at these countries in this Cold War Soviet way, which only favors Putin. He would love for you to continue to look at Russia as being as powerful as the U.S.
Right.
But these government purges that were led by the Office of Personnel Management, which had Russ Vought, who was the architect of Project 2025, those purges already happened in Texas and Florida. So they've already replaced all of those people with loyalists.
Right.
Billions of dollars in dark money flowed through these 501c3s that were tied to fossil fuel firms. So tell me what the connection between fossil fuels and Christianity is. Or is it just that fossil fuel billionaires need bodies and votes to support their policies? Because now I want to get into the heart of this analysis, which I think is new and additive and informative and made this episode worthwhile. So I want you to take a breath. So this segment won't be speculative. It's financial, it's factual, and it's probably the most revealing thread that we've found in this machine. I went through and pulled about 15 names of some of those 501c3s that were involved with Project 2025, and I was trying to understand what happened. So I boiled that down to the 5 that I thought would be most impactful, and I did some analysis. So 501c3s have to file with the IRS government that discloses all sorts of financial information. And in 2022, 5 organizations tied to Project 2025, some of them were named directly in that Mandate for Leadership document. These were training the next generation of dominionist civil servants. So they had an explosion in funding in 2021 and 2022. We're not talking about small grants or natural growth. We're talking 100% growth. 7 million to 140 million in a year. And they were getting 7 million for their entire life up until that point. So hundreds of millions of dollars started flooding in across the ecosystem in 21 and 22, setting the stage for what we have now. And when you think about that, that's a pretty big financial bet. You don't really know if you're going to win the election. So how do you hedge the election? We'll get there. So the most well-known of those 5 organizations is the Heritage Foundation. And Heritage is the central policy engine behind Project 2025. In 2022, its revenue hit 124 million, which was up 25 million from 2021. Its assets now sit at 409 million with an asset to expense ratio of 4.65. So let that sink in. There's a think tank with a war chest that's nearly 5 times its annual spend.
Yeah.
That's what that means. It's a think tank.
Yeah, and they write the bills for the politician. Like usually, the politicians have staff that are supposed to work together and write up policy. They don't need to do that anymore because they have think tanks like the Heritage Foundation to just submit the bills for them. I mean, they submit bills verbatim from Heritage Foundation.
That's right. They submit the bills and the checks. Yep. So when Trump needs money for a ballroom, when Trump needs money to float the military, 1 day's pay when they were out for 2 months.
Yeah.
He knows who to call.
Yeah, and it gets real irritating too when you think about the Senate. It's a tradition. A lot of senators are have legal backgrounds, and they know policy and they know how to interpret policy, but they don't care about that anymore because they have. It just happens on both parties. They have these think groups that just write the bills for them, and then they don't have to do anything. They live in the Senate country club. It's like an old folks country club, and then they get to become cable news celebrities, and that's about it. That's what the job entails.
Yeah, like you called it, the revolving door between senators and lobbyists.
Right.
That brings us to the next name on our list, the Conservative Partnership Institute, which was a group founded by Senator Jim DeMint and was aligned with Mark Meadows. So they reported 45 million in revenue in 2022, which was up from 8 million just 2 years earlier.
Jeez.
And they're the logistical command center for this. They fund real estate, staffing operations, and training future federal officers. So from under 8 million to 45 million. That's not fundraising. That's installing capital.
Yeah.
You're getting ready to do something. That's the point. Back in 2021 and 2022, the infrastructure was being laid down.
Right.
They were getting ready to do this back then. This is what makes this worth mentioning. The American Cornerstone Institute, which was led by Ben Carson. Remember Sleepy Ben Carson? This was a faith policy bridge group that pulled in $5.9 million in 2022. And before that, they were pulling in only six figures, low six figures. Their budget went up tenfold. And then they immediately spent $4 million of that. So the money was going right back out into the infrastructure. And then the American Moment. So here's a pipeline which was training young ideologues to become federal employees. And it was specifically aligned with the values that were outlined in Project 2025. They were building cadres of loyal bureaucrats to come in and take control of the government. So combined, these five organizations brought in over $177 million in 2022 alone, and they spent $129 million. Their total assets exceeded almost $500 million by the end of the year. But the timing of this surge coincides with two major events: the finalization and early rollout of Project 2025, and a strategic pivot from public mobilization to institutional capture. So that was the moment. I mean, I think that was in the library, with the candlestick.
Right.
Like if we were laying this out in front of a jury, we'd be saying you had five entities, all under the radar, all ideologically aligned. In 2021, they were operating on small to moderate budgets. In 2022, a flood of money arrives. Revenue grows by 400 to 1,000%, depending on the group you're in. This funding wasn't dispersed randomly. It was centralized, it was targeted, and it was clustered. So the asset growth, the burn rates, and the staff buildup all point to one thing. They were preparing for execution of a plan. This was how they bankrolled Project 2025. So if you follow that money, you can figure out who's all involved. It's the blueprint to the entire thing. This wasn't a movement that was hoping to win power and figure it out. They secured the capital, they trained replacements, and stockpiled assets before a vote was cast in 2024.
Right.
So the question we ended up with last time we talked about this was, how deliberate was this? Was it a plan? Now we can answer that question. Yes, it absolutely was. We found the money, we found the infrastructure. There was definitely deliberate planning here. Which means it didn't happen organically. That's the narrative in the news, right? That this is just how people voted and this is just what happened. Well, it didn't happen organically. And yes, I know the left engages in all sorts of shenanigans too, but they didn't win. If Harris had won and sucked, we'd be talking about Harris and how much she sucked.
Right.
She didn't win. That didn't happen. But if she had, we'd still be covered, unlike some of these podcasters out here who keep telling you who to vote for.
Yeah, right.
Because this was a war that wasn't just for elections, it was for governance. And the money shows that they were planning to govern regardless of who won. And that's not prophecy or narrative.
So yeah, Project 2025 is basically an administrative coup by design, a government blueprint, not a metaphor. They got, it's a mass purge of federal workers. It's, staffing all the agencies with loyalists. So you got loyalty there too. Rolling back, regulations on climate, labor, and all that. Billionaires love that. Education, they're changing education. They got rid of the Department of Education. And then, of course, the biblical worldview that they spread.
So if you get people who are low on education and believe in whatever biblical worldview you're pushing, which, as we've already said, is far from Christian in many cases, then you have a loyalist army that will do whatever you want them to do. And this suits billionaires and megalomaniacal preachers just fine.
Yeah, and this really is a blueprint for the decline of the U.S. I mean, we were the global center for scientific research for so long. NASA's successes through the decades was largely due to our ability to attract the world's best and brightest.
Yeah. And the concept of American exceptionalism, the idea that we don't do that, the idea that we don't do torture, we don't break the rules of war.
Right.
I can tell you, sure, you can find cases in every year when we broke that.
Right.
But I will also tell you that on a very high level, operators consider it dishonorable to break any of those rules. Like, the U.S. really did have a belief in exceptionalism, even if we didn't always follow it. I have to admit, it's painful, but I don't think it's gone. I think you're wrong. I think police, I think firemen, I think military,
Right.
I think the way that they are being cast and the light that they are being cast, I think you're wrong. I think they know dang well who they are. I think they know dang well what America is. I think you're wrong.
Yeah.
And that's how the public is being used. QAnon and revival culture created a belief feedback loop. Combine that with the analysis that I did of the Twitter algorithm. And mind you, there are big cybersecurity experts that would put that engagement number and bot traffic number at 70%. I'm putting it 50. Like I said, I'm very conservative. I'm putting the number of bot-associated networks at 35%, but there are bona fide experts that would put that number at 50%. So that X algorithm gave this illusion of these things being more popular than they are. That's just a fact. And that allowed them to get narrative buy-in through conspiracy and prophecy. So we're now looking at a paragovernment, or a government within a government, if you will. You've got people in there who have their own theology. They have their own system of installing personnel. They have their own media ecosystem. And they have all these loyalty tests. So what started as revivalism became an institutional power block that then took control. We put this at 13%, maybe, of the United States, meaning 13% of people might support this.
All right.
That leaves 87% of us being like, I didn't really sign up to be part of a dominionist reboot of America.
We're having this discussion at the same time that everyone knows, it's very common knowledge that, in the past 20, 30 years, church membership has drastically gone down in this country. So it's almost like as the population of these churches gets smaller, the more drastic their moves become when it comes to power politics.
And it's very normal for any group to become more extreme as it gets smaller. It just makes sense. As the hype wears off, the looky-loos start to fall off, and only the hardcores remain. So we're seeing this happen with a few different groups in America. I'll leave it to you to figure that out. But some of these groups are becoming more insular and more hardcore.
Yeah, for sure. The one trend you do see, though, is with the a lot of these influencers. I don't really watch a lot of political influencers online, but they talk the line, they speak the line, and then they always have to say, "Oh, yeah, and I'm for Jesus in the church." It's almost like a afterthought. Like you could see them talk years ago and never really talk about religion, but they know that religion has to be in there for them to be part of the club. So I just you just have, again, I think you have two parties in this situation. You have the real believers, the real doomsday believers that think society is crumbling without the church, and then you have those
the people trying to manipulate the true believers.
Right.
Then you have the people trying to manipulate the true believers. That's exactly the scenario here. We've got people who have bad ideas that need votes and bodies.
Right.
And then we have people who are loyal to some extreme ideas that are willing to get behind people with bad intentions in order to get some of their policies through. So these are the games that get played. We talked about how Israel has played some games with these sorts of groups too. Like, these are the power games that get played.
Yeah.
And to try to get this back to more of this academic framing, like, that's what we've been talking about. So at the very top are these billionaires getting together and having some giant occult sex orgy ritual and then deciding what goes on, or how does it all work? And this is, I think, one of those times where we're just trying to break down, this is how it all works, and this is how it all translates into various messages and narratives to us. because they sold people a spiritual war, and what they bought was institutional power.
Right.
They used belief to mask a blueprint. Yes, this was definitely a plan, and it had capital that formed an infrastructure. There was an infrastructure prior to the capital. Like, we can prove all of that. Which means if there was an institutional plan, there was also a plan for narrative control.
Yeah.
And this is what people tend to throw around as a psyop or psychological operation. Like, that word has become so diluted today.
Yeah.
Because people are calling PR talking points that the parties issue every day psyops. Are they? I could see that on some level, sure. Yeah, they're trying to say, no, it was this guy. You're like, look at when there's a shooting or some tragedy. Both parties come out with talking points to say this is what this person's political motives were. Like, that are those psyops? I think it dilutes the word. Like, when I say psyop, I want it to mean it was a deliberate attempt to create a psychological illusion that would deceive the individual and allow the recipient to take power they shouldn't have.
Yeah, totally. Okay, great. So we could add the Heritage Foundation to our growing enemies list.
Oh, yeah, our enemies list. I feel like we've ended up with the same nemesis as the Justice League or the Avengers. I mean, it's getting a little ridiculous at this point. We've got, like, dirty spies, Nazis, organized crime, the FBI, the CIA, bureaucrats who classify everything but their lunch orders, Lockheed, Raytheon, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk.
All defense contractors.
That one guy from the Galileo project that we're pretty sure is CIA.
Yeah, right.
Whoever keeps deleting Jacques Vallée's hard drives. Oh, Satanists, black magic practitioners.
The old bearded guy in the street corner yelling about the end of the world.
Aleister Crowley. Demons.
Oh, demons. Jeez.
Bad gin. Megalomaniacal preachers. Bad fairies.
Yeah, but some of those are frenemies, right? I like to consider jinn and fairies as frenemies.
But not the ones who moonlight as DARPA consultants.
Right.
Then you got the Mothman, Dogman, Bigfoot, Peruvian face peelers.
Oh my God, yeah. Yeah, I guess we do have a lot of enemies.
Dan Bongino. Why couldn't you do a podcast about RC planes? Look at the way it turns and banks. No.
Yeah.
No, you had to get us all mixed up with bad remote viewers that have gambling problems. And to all of our enemies, I must say, may you never find the exit to your underground base.
Yeah, right. So I think that wraps it up. We were doing this to expose the new apostles, right? And we were asking the question, was this deliberate? And was it part of a plan? And after our analysis of the financials, yes, it is part of a plan. But, we'll keep on this thread. And I think it's important because, it's part of our history. We have to, grasp it as it's happening.
And I'll drop a couple links down below. The one I really want you to check out is the timeline. So that's why you understand why we're talking about this more, because we really want to understand what happened today. We want to record what happened today. You guys know how fast this world moves, and people will forget all about it tomorrow. But if we want to understand how a small minority group took control of a big democracy with constitutional protections, I think we have to unpack it real time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll end it there. Thanks a lot, Ram.
Thank you, Bones. Appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate everyone for listening. Please visit our website at forteanwinds.com.
Take care, y'all.